Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining this first UN webinar in 2022. Very exciting to see so many of you on the call, and very nice to be back with you for webinars. Oops, I have a little bit of on audio issue there. So today we're going to learn how the implementation of the UN data strategy is going. And some of you who have been members of UN and joining UN webinars for some time may recall that we actually hosted a webinar on the data strategy pretty much exactly 2 years ago when it was still in development and when no one had ever heard of COVID. So 2 years since then and 18 months since the strategy was actually adopted, we thought it might be a good opportunity to reflect on what's worked well, what has changed, what are some of the lessons learned from implementing it. And this is why we're hosting this webinar today. And just to take a quick sidestep, as you all know, data was a big priority for the Secretary General back then, and if anything, is an even bigger priority today. Regular webinar joiners will again know the quintet of change, which are the critical capabilities that the Secretary General believes will help to transform the UN over the coming years and help achieve our common agenda, this famous report that he launched at the end of last year. And these capabilities are, of course, data, innovation and digital transformation, strategic foresight, behavioral science, and results orientation. So really, the Secretary General thinks data are absolutely critical to transform the UN over the coming years. And we're thrilled to hear how the data strategy team has been supporting this over the past 18 months and what they have learned. But before I introduce you to our presenter, I want to briefly find out from you how much you know about the data strategy. So we're launching a quick poll. Everyone invited to participate, please. The first question, are you familiar with the UN data strategy? Always very helpful for our presenters to actually know how many people on the call have heard of it. And then there's a follow-up question as well, which is, have you joined the UN data strategy community? We have a policy of trying to get to at least 75% before I close the poll. So clicking at 60, if you haven't voted yet, take your pick. Okay, great, thank you very much. I'm sharing the results here. So 67% of you have heard of it, that's fantastic. And then we have a few people who are not familiar with it or just vaguely familiar with it, about a third. So our presenter can introduce you to that. And then great to see that about 60% of you are also members of the UN data strategy community yet, a really wonderful community. We're going to hear a little bit more about it yet. And more people with potentially intentions, equally great. And then I'd also like to ask you one second question, and that relates to whether your organization has a data strategy. Always interesting for us to hear if you have one for your organization that you're using to guide your work. If you're using maybe the one that the UN has launched, or if yours is based on that. Let's again take a quick pulse check. Fantastic, loving the active participation. We're almost at the 75%. Here we go, I'm ending the poll and sharing the results again so that you can see them. 50%, just under 50% of you have a data strategy in your organization, and the other are either not sure or don't think so. Very interesting. Maybe for the just over 50% who don't have one or don't know, some good inspiration can come out of the session today. And with that, I just briefly want to tell you that we're going to hear about 20 minutes of presentation, and you see Kirsten there already. I'll introduce you to in a second. And then we leave plenty of room for Q&A, and we'd really appreciate if you could use the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen. So that's not the chat, but the Q&A box. It helps a lot with monitoring, and we'll also be happy to give you the floor during the Q&A. You can see people's questions, you can upvote them. It makes it a little bit easier for us to prioritize. And I'm gonna knock the first question out of the park. We always get asked if the webinar is being recorded and the slides are shared. And the answer is yes, we're going to do that. We're going to post it in our webinar library. The link is in the chat, and we're also going to send you an email with it. And with that, really enough from me. Kirsten, very good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Everyone, Kirsten is a Senior Planning Officer in the Executive Office of the Secretary General. As I mentioned, he's a good and old friend of UN, old in terms of long-standing. And you may have met him virtually in previous webinars when he introduced the data strategy, as I mentioned. when he shared updates about the CEB's innovation capacity mapping or the new technology strategy. So lots of new tech topics that Kirsten is working on and kindly always keeping us updated on. Kirsten, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to hand over to you to introduce us what's been going on with the data strategy.
Hey, thank you so much, Joanna, and thanks to everyone for joining today. The UN Innovation Network is a community with impact, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share an update on the data strategy with you today, some 18 months after we started the journey. Now, what I'd like to do today is to share the very same update with you that we shared with the Secretary General and his senior management group just a few weeks ago. And that presentation takes a big picture change management perspective on the UN Secretariat and the UN family as a whole. At the end of the deck, we've also summarized actions that are tailored to the perspectives of all colleagues, to the perspective of managers, or to the perspective of organizational leaders. And Johanna will, as always, share the deck with you. Now, let's get started. And before delving into the details of progress, challenges, and how we asked senior managers to support, let me recap a little bit what we set out to do and what we did not set out to do. Now, the vision behind the strategy is a UN family that is able to unlock its full data potential for better support and better decisions for people and planet. Fundamentally, that strategy that we put together is about guiding and supporting internal change so that we deliver better results. And that process is a marathon. It's never going to be a sprint. It's not an event, it's a journey. Other colleagues said the other day. So today I'm speaking for...
Sorry, to just come in briefly. Did you want to share some slides?
I did want to share some slides.
There we go. Thank you very much.
That is absolutely correct, right?
Wonderful.
So here are the slides now that I'm speaking to, and I'm speaking for a lean support team and for the work of a lot of UN colleagues across the family. So this is really a team effort. Now, the long-term change that we're seeking fundamentally, and that was a big important message we sent in the senior management group, is not about adding resources in organizations. Fundamentally, it's about changing how we use the resources our organizations already have. So change management as a big, big theme. Now, getting to the SG's long-term vision of a UN family that is able to unlock its full data potential requires nurturing organizations that are capable of analyzing and managing data with purpose. And that is best done, we believe, when we focus on real-world challenges or use cases that we face today. It's easier said than done, but it's absolutely critical. Now, of course, these use cases will also require shifts in what we call enablers of change: culture, people, partnerships, technology, and governance. And in the presentation today, that is what I will focus on. We will have an opportunity to explore specific data use cases on other occasions. For example, just yesterday in the Secretary General's Data Governance Group, we discussed the concept for a new public UN data platform that I'm sure we'll get back to on other occasions with the UN Innovation Network. Now, in this deck, we are reporting against some 30 recommendations and 125 steps that the strategy encapsulates. And we're reporting against the work plan that the Secretary General's Executive Committee had approved for 2021, including a call to support resource mobilization for data investments. And primarily in the presentation today, I will speak to progress in the UN Secretariat. The UN family is large. The UN data strategy is a playbook for all organizations, but the focus today really is on the UN Secretariat. So how far have we come over the last 18 months? In a nutshell, we believe we've made sufficient progress to begin a second phase of strategy implementation, where we move from centrally orchestrated support to decentralized action in each entity. And I'll come back towards the end of the presentation with some more details on that. But the poll that Johanna launched in the beginning is already a very good hint of what we believe is required if your organization hasn't yet thought through what data-driven change means for you and there isn't a strategy yet. It is important to start that journey in phase 2. Now, of the 125 steps in the strategy, 64% of the short-term work is complete. And for the key enablers, people, culture, partnerships, governance, technology, the rate is at 81%. Now, translating that into better day-to-day data capabilities in data management or in analytics will require lots more work. And you see the capability percentage is much lower. So in the capability space or in being able to use data better, we're really still in a very long game. Now, change management work and intangible progress aside, the strategy has already unlocked monetary value 10 times the initial investment, and that will further multiply beyond 2022. So there is a good story there as well. Now, after 18 months, what can UN entities, what can your organizations now build on? What is the progress? Where are the challenges? And where did we ask senior managers to support the journey? And let me start with the technology enablers. On technology, it's important to understand that, especially when it comes to data and analytics, having the technology is less and less a constraint for most of our organizations. In the UN Secretariat, for example, we were able to bring additional analytics and cloud platforms on board, and they are now ready to use. That portfolio includes solutions from industry leaders, both when it comes to cloud infrastructure and to analytics tool sets. So there's progress there. Where are the challenges and how does management need to support? First, experience with these new technology platforms remains thin, including in our IT teams. Second, business teams still face bureaucracy when trying to access new cloud services. And budgets are still too focused in the technology space on physical assets. So for example, buying physical computers or staff, while increasingly the need will be in IT services. So where did we ask senior leaders to support the transformation in technology? First, we asked for a better integration of IT teams in business-led collaborations, breaking down silos between business and IT teams and within IT teams. And we asked for support in shifting budgets, supporting upgrades on platforms, including for security, making cloud access easier and facilitating cross-entity collaboration so that colleagues in the UN family can work together virtually as if they are one organization. So that's on technology. And when the story is that technology is available, we need to understand that the fundamental unlock for some of that, for most of that, can only come from people through changes in culture, in training, and in recruitment. And on data culture, we've made good progress together with many of you. Over 2,400 colleagues have already joined the data strategy knowledge community since we launched, and 11,000 colleagues so far have participated in events that demonstrate what is possible with data. For example, nearly 300 colleagues joined when data journalists from The Economist magazine explained how they deliver insights with data and how they transformed their organization. And we'll put a link to that recording in the chat later on. And these events are absolutely critical because they help us understand what's possible and how others got there, and they help us learn and come together. Now, how did we ask to support deeper staff engagement? Essentially, we asked for colleagues to join the data strategy knowledge community. The QR code is here in the deck. We'll also put a link to that in the chat as well. And we asked for managers to support knowledge communities and the support teams that are required, the community managers, the success supporters in each organization. Now, on training, we are gaining ground. Training is an important part of supporting the capability shift. Over the past year, the UN Secretariat has onboarded more scalable training solutions, as have others. As of 31 December in the UN Secretariat, nearly 14,000 participants benefited from some form of data training. And you see here on the chart how that has really scaled up, particularly towards the end of the year. The biggest boost came in October when 2,200 colleagues took advantage of a new free offer to build basic digital skills for everyone, everywhere in the UN family, and I'll come back to that. And that basic empowerment is absolutely critical. On the right of the slide, you see some of the KPIs on training. For example, half of colleagues say they only have average data skills, and a quarter of colleagues report minimal abilities. So focusing on that and supporting those colleagues is absolutely critical. What's some of the progress we were able to make over the last year? As I mentioned, we brought on board free basic instructor-led digital training. We unlocked certifications for advanced skill sets. We unlocked co-investments from departments. We are bringing on board a low-cost, scalable solution for access to accredited courses from top universities across the globe, and we've supported training sprints. Now, there are challenges on training, and some of the important ones are little centralized curation of training offers and budgets. And that is something that we asked for improvement on. A lot of training budgets are also spent on one-off consultancies or workshops, which are important, but it is also important to ensure that the content is reusable. And not all of the training topics are hyper-specific to UN organizations. Data skills, for example, are quite generic, and it is sometimes better to tap into existing offers rather than developing content from scratch. Now, in order to support that movement, we need to, of course, improve on systems contracts so that some of those solutions can be contracted much more easily. So we asked managers to ensure that everyone is aware of the training offers, and we updated the data governance group on that yesterday. We asked for support on better allocation of training funding and curation, and for support on better contracts to empower you wherever you are in the organization to take more advantage of different providers. On to the next topic, and that is absolutely critical in the long-term recruitment. And progress here is not picking up fast enough, and that was a message that we've come back to over and over with the Secretary General and senior managers over the course of 2021, and we will continue to do so in the years ahead. So what do you see here on that slide? You see that less than 1 in 5 entities in the UN Secretariat are hiring sufficiently in data-related roles to meet the Secretary General's target by 2026. By 2026, he expects that about 10% of UN colleagues work in data roles or in data-related roles. In the humanitarian space, we are quite close to that. In many other sectors, we are very, very far from that goal. We're tracking progress across 113 entities in the UN Secretariat, and over half of those had not made a single data hire in the last 12 months. And that was a big point of discussion in the senior management group on how to pursue that. Also, where hires are made, they're still too often in pure IT functions. You see on some of the KPIs on the right side that we have a fairly good handle on how this is picking up. So where did we ask senior managers to support? First, we made them aware that new job profiles are available to hire data analysts, engineers, and scientists. The controller, the chief financial officer, had issued guidance and continues to issue guidance to prioritize these capabilities. And in the short term, the best path for change, if you're a manager, is through temporary job openings, and any vacant post in the UN Secretariat can be used for that. Of course, long term, as a manager, you need to do a bit more work to reclassify positions, but that will become easier once you have colleagues on board to show impact and value add. A big message we also sent to senior managers was support for entry-level jobs. For example, at the P1 or P2 level, and similarly for national field service and general service positions. They must be reintroduced because it's young people that bring the skills that we need as organizations to make progress. And in fact, in the UN Secretariat, for those of you who know how budgets work there, the Advisory Committee on Budgetary and Administrative Questions, in its 2020 report on the UN Secretariat's budget, actually requested that shift to more entry-level posts. So there's also high-level member state support for some of those changes that we envisage. Now, final enabler, governance. There's some progress and still a lot of work to do, and I'll speak to some of those issues here. Resourcing and strategies in phase 2 for the data strategy. Now, most importantly, we spent some of our time in 2022 to help build a more coherent international financing architecture for data with purpose. Two new facilities will come online in 2022. For the UN family, a new complex risk analytics fund, in short, CRAFT, is a true milestone. In a nutshell, that will support investments in open risk data and ecosystems for crisis prevention, anticipation, and response in partnership with the international community. And given that over 50% of UN system spending happens in crisis-affected and fragile settings, that is a great strategic fit and opportunity to make a difference for people and planet. And CRAFT will work in tandem with a larger World Bank-hosted global data facility that will focus on data for social and economic development and statistical capacity building. We are teaming up with the World Bank and the OECD to advocate jointly for those instruments over the course of 2022. The Deputy Secretary General is a great champion of this entire agenda. Now, on strategies, and Johanna asked the question in the beginning, has your organization thought through its data-driven transformation? Has it thought through its journey? And if not, it's really time to do that, because we're launching phase 2 and entering phase 2 of the strategy. And that will mean replicating the data strategy in each UN entity, but focused on that entity's specific purpose, challenge, and opportunities. And based on the last survey that we had done with UN leaders, 40% of UN organizations already had formulated such a strategy. And that actually tallies really, really well with your perceptions from the poll in the beginning. Now, if your organization hasn't yet done that, let me share an example of what strategy development could look like. It's important because strategy development takes time, but will pay off. In the UN Secretariat, the Department of Peace Operations started its digital strategy design in the fall of 2020, launched it in August last year, and is mobilizing resources for its implementation as we speak. The goal of that strategy is to make peacekeeping more innovative, more data-driven, and technology-enabled. Now, the benefits of that strategy are large. They include that missions are better able to adapt to their operating needs and risks, take more evidence-based decisions, optimize the way they deploy resources, enhance safety and security for staff and personnel, better account for impact, and thereby help secure the future of peacekeeping, being able to tell the story of what difference we're making and doing that with evidence. Now, off the heart of that change in the Department of Peace Operations must be shifts and will be shifts in hiring, similar to those that OCHA, for example, started many years ago. And it will also require new forms of collaboration between DPO units, technology teams, and outside partners. UNDP and UNEP have begun similar journeys, and many other organizations in the UN family are on that trip as well. And if you are not, your organization should consider the same. Now, let me conclude on this slide, and I'll focus just on what we asked of senior managers as we transition from phase 1 to phase 2 of the strategy. So from the things that we really need to do in the center to help everyone drive changes in recruitment, in training, in technology. As we move into phase 2, we expect more decentralized action. As I mentioned, we've got a lot of examples and enablers in place to support that. Dedicated strategies and leadership will now be critical for more progress, including leadership and data roles. Our team will continue to support with advice, provided we can mobilize the required resources for that. Now, I stop here. We will share with you action summaries that summarize some of the key actions that you can take as a colleague, that you can take as a manager, and that you need to think through if you're an organization or a department. But I'll leave it at that and look forward to your questions. Over to you, Johanna.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. Great introduction, great overview to what's been going on in the data strategy space. Congrats to you and the very lean team for making all this happen. I think you said 81% of the 124 steps complete. That is really quite amazing. Well done, you. Colleagues, a quick note to say that we're happy to take questions. We're going to please take them from the Q&A box. So help us. The chat is a little bit confusing. If you are just one person like me trying to monitor it, please put your questions in the Q&A box. It helps us a lot. Please also take a moment and upvote questions that other colleagues have asked and you might find interesting. If you leave your name with your question, we're happy to give you the floor so that you can ask Kirsten the question yourself. And while colleagues are getting into that mindset, I just want to launch a last poll. And you've heard from Kirsten what the different enablers are to promote data uptake in organizations. And we'd like to know from you which one you think is the most important one. Here's the poll. You'll see that he's discussed the top 4, and we've cheekily added a 5th one for you to choose, which is leadership. So we're very curious to hear what do you think is actually most critical. Take your pick. Okay, and while you're doing this, I'm going to take a first look at the questions. And Kirsten, there's a lot for you. Brace yourself. I'm going to get to that now. Okay, I need 10% more of people to answer the poll, please. Before we can close it, we have the 75% policy, as you know. We're at 67. I know it's a tough one. Please take your pick. 73, 74. There we go, 75%. And Kirsten, I should ask you before I share the results, what do you think people think is the most important enabler?
Well, I hope everyone's putting their money on people and culture, because that's really where we need the change. Culture change in particular is important. Hard skills are super, super important. Leadership, I think, is something that you can absolutely count on. Johanna already explained the Secretary General is an absolute champion of all the modern capabilities the UN family needs: data, innovation, digital, behavioral science, and strategic foresight. The Deputy Secretary General is as well. If you ever need someone to validate that data investments are important, you have your champions there.
Okay, you are very good. You know your community. Here are your results. Over 50% said people and culture. And then the second runner-up, leadership, indeed, 28%. So important to have. So glad to hear everyone is on the same page. And let's leave it at that. Okay, colleagues, we're coming to all of your questions. Again, we're taking them from the Q&A box. If you're typing them in the chat right now, I'm afraid we cannot take them from there. But we'll take them from there and happy to give you the floor if you put it in the Q&A box. Kirsten, I want to start you off nice and easy. There's some tricky questions. I'll save them for a little bit later. The first one, is there a depository of the training that is available, especially more advanced courses from universities and other organizations that are available to us that have been curated by you and the community?
Great question. Let me also highlight the work here of Sarah Jane that many of you know. She's supporting our change management and community work. She's curating the data strategy knowledge hub. I will put into the chat the training page on the knowledge hub that takes you to some of the training offers from basic offers in Microsoft Office to learning paths in LinkedIn, as well as others more specialized offers around data, including the Camino program and the Unite Academy. There are also a lot of other efforts, including from the UN Systems Staff College. Now, as I mentioned, for more advanced skill sets, we are launching a pilot. We're launching that pilot in the UN Secretariat with Coursera.org. We will make, in partnership with the Office of Human Resources, accounts available to up to 1,300 colleagues across the UN family to pick data courses from world-class universities that will provide you with usable credits or certifications. That is something that will roll out over the course of 2022 in the first half. It's something we're really looking forward to and would ask all organizations to consider as well, because we really need to get to scale.
Wonderful, thank you. I have a little bit of a controversial question for Paul here, but it got a lot of likes, so I'm going to ask you this. And Paul is saying, it seems like you've quite heavily favored Microsoft tools and Amazon Web Service. What about open source tools like R and Python? Are some trainings available on those, and have you included them? And then a big thank you from Paul for the presentation.
Great, and thank you, Paul, for that question. Let me maybe share my screen again and speak to that a little bit. I think it's not either or. I think it's both and. The question here on that, and let me share what I mean by that. You're absolutely right that in the presentation I did focus. I did focus on the larger platforms. So in the technology slide over here, on the left, you see some of the analytics and BI solutions, and they include Power BI, they include Tableau, Qlik, SAP Cloud Analytics, and on the right side, you see the cloud platforms. Now, I say it's both and because basically if two things are necessary, probably a move to the cloud, and there are important cloud providers, established cloud providers, and we do not necessarily believe that organizations need to build their own clouds. It's much more efficient and in many ways is also more secure to use established offers. Now, that being said, in those cloud solutions, you absolutely do need to use Python, R, and other solutions, and all of them enable the integration of those languages. And in fact, Python is absolutely critical for getting anything done in AWS and Azure. And so that's something that everyone should have a look at.
Thank you very much for clarifying. I'm going to give the floor to our colleague David Jensen from UN Environment. David, I see you have a lot of burning questions. Can I ask you to please limit it to maybe one for this time being? David, if you go, you should be able to unmute.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Absolutely. Go ahead. Welcome.
Yeah, I had 3 questions in the chat. Hi, Kirsten. I guess the question that's in my mind, as you say, cultural change and mindset change is the most fundamental part, I think, of digital transformation. And what we see is there are many colleagues that are having a hard time embracing the change. There's intransigence, there's fear, there's various blockers, let's say, to cultural change. And I think the UN has typically done business in a very top-down way for many decades. And so some colleagues are having a really hard time with concepts like user-centered design, agility, feedback, all these kinds of sort of digital agility style things. Any advice on how to deal with colleagues that simply do not want to embrace the mindset and cultural shift? Thanks.
Thanks, David. And before answering your questions, just congratulations on all the work that UNEP is doing and that you and the colleagues are doing to drive the digital transformation. Inger spoke very, very eloquently and passionately about the change management work in UNEP, and you certainly seem to have very, very strong leadership support there. Now, how to first, some ideas on how to engage that and how to support change, because ultimately it's really about taking colleagues along. Now, I think it's important to start where there is movement and to concentrate on those places where there is a willingness for change and to build coalitions and communities around the places where there is movement. You're right, there are some areas of work where it's much harder. I think it's important to generate and build up momentum and focus on where change is possible. Other colleagues might take a little bit more time to catch up and to come around. That in general. Now, you can count on our support. Johanna already mentioned the UN 2.0 agenda and some of the change management support that we're putting out there. Let me just mention, we will run another capability assessment across the UN family that we will discuss with all UN system leaders. We are, of course, already doing a lot of work, for example, on behavioral science, and that community is growing, and Johanna and Mary are supporting that. The strategic foresight work is spinning up. The data work is rolling, innovation work as well. So you can count on top management support in the rollout for those strategies. I think if someone comes and says, hey, we want to do this, what do you think? The answer will be yes, will be a definite yes. So that's what I would say. I also want to point you and recall that I mentioned in the presentation that when it comes to the rejuvenation, for example, of the UN Secretariat, you also have strong support in General Assembly bodies, including in the ACABQ, where colleagues are asking for the reintroduction of entry-level posts in the UN family.
Thank you very much for the answer, Kirsten, and thank you, David, for the question, and hopefully we'll have time to come back to some of your other questions as well. Kirsten, I have a bunch of questions related to creating or designing data strategies for organizations, and colleagues are wondering how can, what kind of inspiration is out there aside from the UN data strategy? Do you have a repository of other data strategies that other organizations have launched? If not, we might be happy to help you crowdsource that. And what kind of support can your team offer to organizations wanting to create data strategies?
Yeah, super relevant question, and thank you for raising that. In principle, let's say we've designed the UN data strategy as a playbook for you to draw on. We believe that it contains the most important concepts that everyone should be familiar with, how they can be applied, and how you can drive change. So really ask you to mine that as a resource, and I'm putting in the chat a link to our data strategy explorer that breaks down all of the concepts in a little bit more detail in bite-sized form. That's number one. Number two, we are also putting together a collection of use cases that includes also recordings for all past events that we've done in the data strategy community. If you are looking for an event that is immediately relevant and super interesting, I'll put a link to an event we did with The Economist magazine and their data journalism team into the chat. As I mentioned, over 300 colleagues joined that, and I think they're interesting and important lessons there as well. Now, that's informal support. It is, especially if you're an organization or if you represent an organization, also important to get some professional advice. So when we did the data strategy design, we did two things. We looked at samples from other organizations, public sector in particular, but we also reached out to knowledge advisory firms such as Gartner. I personally find that support and research support in particular super helpful. The ability to call experts, ask for advice is critical. In the past, these advisory services tended to focus very heavily on the IT teams. What we're learning in the UN Secretariat is that it is super beneficial for business units, or programmatic teams to start developing these advisory relationships. They're available on a subscription basis. And if you're a leader in HR, or you're a leader in policy, or you're a leader in a program area, it might be a good idea to get on board with a subscription that gives you basically a hotline to get some knowledge and insight on data-driven transformation, digital transformation, innovation, and organizational change.
Excellent, thank you very much. And piggybacking off that slightly, just with a clarifying question from a colleague based at an RCO and as an RCO, and they're wondering, should they be leading the development of data strategies? Is that done at country level, or should it be done at agency level? What would be your recommendation there?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's something that that we've been coming back to, or that's been popping up as a question from time to time. Here's my take on it. It is probably most effective if each organization develops clarity about how data capability can help them address business opportunities and challenges. Or in other words, in short, it is probably best if each organization focuses on their data strategy or action plan first. Get your house in order. Organize your thoughts, support change. In parallel, it might sometimes be helpful to have collective strategies. So for example, at the country level, it might be good for the country team to develop a consensus around to what extent do we really want to push data focused programs, digital transformation programs to support stakeholders in government. Do we want to make that a priority for us as a UN family, and where would we get the advice from? Yeah. So that's how I would take it. I think in DCO, a lot of good work is ongoing to support DCO's digital journey, and that needs to continue. And I would focus on organizations first, and the collective is something where one can establish an agreement on priorities, but getting everyone on board with the joint program, I think, is probably something with mixed results.
Great advice, thank you. I think one of the biggest challenges in the interagency space are also data sharing agreements. I don't know if you're covering that, Kirsten, but maybe that is something that RCs could help facilitate as well. I want to give the floor to our colleague Pooja. Pooja, you're able to unmute, and you have asked a question that's very similar to the one that's currently top rated. If you'd like to take the floor, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Kirsten, Joanna. Hello from rainy Nairobi. I hope you can hear me. You know, my colleague David asked a very similar question, so I think I'll take the opportunity to slightly divert. One of the things that you mentioned, Kirsten, is about collaboration on data projects, interagency collaboration, right? And I am just wondering, is there a repository or a common place where you can review these kind of projects and look at the overlaps and perhaps reach out? There's so much work that's being done in parallel, so I'm wondering how we can best utilize any common space. Thanks.
Thank you, Pooja, for that question. So you're absolutely right. Exchanging knowledge and experience between different teams is critical. Now, that's what the networks exist for, what the communities exist for. Johanna, Sarah Jane, Mary, and others are, I think, doing incredible work. We need to do more collectively here. I've already put in the chat the use case collection that we have on the data strategy hub. It's built on the events we're doing, so it's not super large, but it's in depth and it's growing. Johanna has a similar repository for innovation work. In many cases, these projects are interesting as well. In addition to that, I'd want to point you, especially in the humanitarian space or crisis space, to the work of our colleagues in the Humanitarian Data Center. I'll put a link to that in the chat here as well. Now, I do want to also thank you for the inspiration and asking us to do more in that space. It's a cue that we will certainly take up to support both projects that share data more broadly, such as the Humanitarian Data Exchange or the new data.un.org platform, which will roll up not tomorrow, but in the years ahead, as well as the experience exchange that we're supporting through the communities.
Wonderful. Thank you for posting the data. They're a big fan of these colleagues. They're doing fantastic work in this space, both on making data available and helping colleagues use them. So please make sure to use them as a resource and for inspiration. I'd like to go to our colleague Barnaby next. Barnaby, you had a question that I thought was very interesting. You are able to take the floor now if you'd like to.
Yeah, thanks, Johanna. Hi, Kirsten, and thanks for the presentation. Yeah, I think my question is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, you've got this target of 10% to have data, positions in the Secretariat, and I think, in my particular case, I've got one that has to go through reclassification, and we're hopeful that member states will support it, but also fearful that it might not be supported because member states look at reclassification as abolishment of a position and creation of a new position. So the position you're abolishing, you don't need. The one you're creating, well, it's too expensive. So I think a lot of managers are concerned about putting forward reclassification requests, converting, for example, a position to a different staff category or level. It's very risky. So as such, there's this major impediment. I'm wondering what is being done to socialize, sensitize member states to, this issue and get support for it. Especially that, we live in an age where there's enormous investment flowing into technologies and, startups. And there's an article in the New York Times today about how, you don't even have to go raising money anymore if you have a startup venture. Investment just flows to people now. There's a lot of money in, supporting data-driven and technology, oriented work. So, are we as the UN sort of positioning this as an area where member states should be investing and creating that support that's going to be needed so that we get the investment that's very much needed to drive the strategy forward. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, Kirsten. Thanks.
Thank you, Barnaby, for raising this point, which is important. It's something that colleagues in the UN Secretariat will be familiar with. It's less common in UN agencies, funds, and programs that have a bit of a different resource allocation process. Now, in the UN Secretariat, let's say a few things are relevant also in your conversations and in team conversations when budgets are being put together. First, I think as a large umbrella, I want to point you to the Secretary General's Common Agenda report that he published late last year. It essentially represents a vision for change in the UN system and the multilateral system writ large for the next 5 years. The procedural resolution for that report was supported by over 160 member states. There's a GA process going on the details for that. And I mention that because an integral part of the Common Agenda is support and a vision of a UN 2.0 with all the elements that we set out and I mentioned before: data, digital, behavioral science, strategic foresight, results orientation. I'm putting a link to a one-pager to that concept into the chat, and Johanna will know because we put that together as a team. So there's support and a larger organizational change agenda that you can refer to. In addition, I already mentioned that there is good support in the oversight bodies for organizational change writ large, including for the concept of rejuvenation, the idea of increasing the share of entry-level positions in the UN Secretariat, where they have become increasingly rare. And I want to emphasize that because it's with young people that we find the skills that we need most urgently, and where you will also find a lot of passion to invest in a career with purpose. Something that becomes increasingly hard as you move towards the senior level. So that support exists. Specifically, have a look, I think, at page 52 of the 2022 ACBQ report. Now, in addition, you might have seen that the controller is supporting organizational change in his budget guidance and memo. He always emphasizes the need to invest in the capabilities we're discussing here, both in the regular budget and in the peacekeeping budget, and that's also something worth referring to. We're watching closely how some of those discussions proceed in the ACBQ and in the fifth committee. Fingers crossed, but also do reach out and share your experience with us and with me, because we're interested in supporting wherever we can.
Wonderful, thank you, Kirsten. Coming to what I thought was the best acronym of 2021, CRAFT. I think that was such a nicely chosen name. And we have a bunch of questions about CRAFT. Can you say a little bit more about who will be able to apply to the fund, how will it work, and then there was also an interesting question related to the governance of it. And while you gather your thoughts, I just want to say to colleagues again that we're taking your questions only in the Q&A box. We're unfortunately not able to monitor the chat for questions. If you have some, please pop them in there. And using this again, the webinar will be recorded and shared. I've had multiple questions about as well. It'll be in our webinar library and we'll share it with you afterwards. Back to you, Kirsten, for some thoughts on craft.
Thank you, Johanna. I will get to the craft point, but I do want to circle back just for a second on Barnaby's question, in particular as a manager, how you can, other strategies that you can employ to help bring on board the capabilities that you need, and just to point you in a few more directions. The exercise that you referred to is reclassification, which is essentially you ask the General Assembly to change the nature of a post. And in the long term, that would be required. In the short term, I think temporary job openings are a very, very important strategy to help accelerate change that can help you through 12 months, that can help you through up to 24 months, a time that one can use to advance the reclassification process. So message here is let's get started. XB support is also important in that context, and to think through as teams what are change management projects that we can excite partners for, because they make a difference for organizational impact. Secondments are another important strategy to pursue. UNV posts are another important strategy to bring capabilities on board, and I do not want to discount absolutely that intern support and internships, fellowship opportunities are an absolutely critical way of bringing new ideas on board. I just wanted to highlight that for all colleagues on the call who are thinking through how can I support change of skills in my team. Now on craft, thank you for asking the question. I'm not going to delve into too much detail today. I will bring up the slide again. It's a topic that we will hopefully come back to. Let me share my screen, and I will also put into the chat a link to the craft website, where you will have an opportunity to find out a little bit by yourself what this is all about. Watch the launch event, read the one-pager, read the press release, watch some of the videos on that site. As you see on the slide, craft is a new multilateral financing instrument. It is part of a larger architecture we're putting together with international partners. Now, craft is a multi-partner trust fund hosted by the UN's Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office. We had a launch event for that in October. The focus is open risk data and ecosystems for crisis prevention, anticipation, and response. We envisage some 10+ contributing partners to help us secure data sets that we all need when it comes to crisis response, and to invest in innovative initiatives and in a larger community that can help us make more connections between a diverse set of partners, between implementers, communities, researchers, and contributing partners, because fundamentally we believe no organization will ever be able to address all its data and analytics challenges on its own. It will always require what is often referred to as an ecosystem. It's absolutely critical, and it's part of the larger partnership agenda. Many of you thought in the beginning partnerships are maybe not that important. Actually, I believe they are fundamentally important for us in making progress. Many of the skills and capabilities we will need will always be on the outside, and we need to learn to connect ourselves to it. And craft exists to support that work. As I mentioned, we're putting together the fund. It'll become operational later in the year. The steering committee will bring together contributing partners, non-contributing partners, and the UN family. It's a cross-pillar exercise because we fundamentally believe that crisis and fragile settings inherently combine humanitarian development and peace concerns and human rights concerns. So it's really designed as a broad instrument. I hope I'm answering the gist of it, but just to note that we look forward to coming back on a more detailed briefing on craft. It's not yet the time to send project proposals. I want to warn, yeah, there will be a call for proposals later in the year, and but it is very important to understand that craft will work together with the Global Data Facility, and it's a really great team effort that we have going with colleagues in the bank and others. Over.
Thank you, Kirsten. And as we say in Tanzania, Karibu, you're welcome to come back anytime. Happy to lend this forum for you to share more with interested colleagues. And from what I'm sensing, there's a lot of interest. We're gonna hit our 20th question. So well done for you for fielding all of them, and thanks for all your insightful answers. This one is a slightly tricky and interesting one, I reckon, but it's top voted. So, and you just raised your hand, Kirsten. You have a question.
I want to say I need to step off in 2 minutes. So
sure.
Look forward to this last question. And thanks to everyone for being so active in participating. I hope this was useful.
Okay, so I have two, and you can decide how you want to split your time across them. One is how you quantify the impact of the strategy in monetary terms. And then I thought it might be nice to end on a high note and say, even if people aren't senior managers, if they're not IT, so they're not the data unit per se, what can they do to help promote the strategy?
Let me start with the first, and just to make a very general but super, super important point. The data strategy is not about the IT teams. It is also not about the statistics teams. It is about the fundamental insight that data in today's world represents a strategic asset for the organization writ large, and that it's a strategic concern. For the SG and the DSG, and the CDC, and for Volker in our office, that is crystal clear. In fact, it's about how we can bring data capabilities and better data use into the center of the organization and into every team. That's why it's called a data strategy for everyone, everywhere. I will put a link again to the strategy, or Johanna, if you can do it in the chat, and really invite you to join the data strategy community. And I'll put a link to that sign up form in the chat as well. We actually have events coming up already next week. Now on the on how we're tracking progress. You saw in the deck that there are two elements to that. One is tracking the and I'm sharing my screen. One is tracking the actions, and you saw that those that we classified as short-term in the strategy of the 125 overall are progressing really, really well. Others not that much. We're keeping a central tab on that. Now, on the monetary value, and I do want to emphasize that actually, and as you said in the beginning, people, culture are important, and I would count those as intangibles. But if you want to just focus on the intangibles, the way that we did that is we know what we initially invested in the strategy team, and are grateful for the support from partners for that, including from the UK's reform unit. So we're quite clear on how much we invested. We're also tracking additional investments that we were able to unlock, either through pro bono support for use cases or for training, co-investments from departments in training efforts, where sometimes we invest in training and ask others to co-invest. Entities, including UNICEF, seconded generously to the strategy team in our office. So we're keeping a good tab on that. And then the long-term monetary value is a result of all of those things that I already mentioned, and support from the multilateral data financing instruments that I just referred to.
And with that, we've ended on the hour. I'm going to say a huge thank you for joining us once again. Appreciate you always coming back and sharing these top-level messages with the big community here to make sure we're all on board and we can all help promote data. Thank you very much, Kirsten, for fielding the questions, for sharing your insights.
Thanks to everyone. Thanks, and hope to see you again soon.
Hope to see you again, Joran. Everyone, if you are still with me, I just wanted to say that, yes, I've had a lot of requests for a recording of this webinar and the slides, and we're going to make both available in our webinar library, and we'll also email it to you. We'll include a list of resources, links to the data strategy and the community. So that will all be with you soon. And with that, we're going to say thank you so much for joining this first webinar of the year, and we hope to see you again in future events of the UN Innovation Network or the data strategy community. Wishing you all the best, stay healthy, stay well, and we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.